Hi everybody. Now, I don't know who's watching, but I'm going to read another chapter, chapter 5 of The Fields of Home, mainly for Bert and Cora in China, the country of China, and whoever else wants to watch. The Fields of Home takes place right here in Maine. Some of you old-timers like me will recognize the scene like that. In fact, I remember my father haying like that when I was a kid, right here on the farm. Well, let's see now. And they didn't call it a hay wagon, they called it a hay rack. Okay, chapter 5, Snath and Scythe. I could hardly wait to get into the field so I could show Grandfather that I really knew something about haying. It worked just exactly backwards. Instead of letting me run the mowing machine, he told me to take the snath and scythe and cut hay out from under the apple trees. I might just as well have been trying to cut it with a broom as with a scythe. On the first swing, I ran the edge of the blade along a hidden rock. Then it wouldn't cut worth a cent. To see Father swinging a scythe, it looked to be the easiest thing in the world to do. The scythe went back and forth like a clock pendulum, and left stubble 2 or 3 inches high. For me, it was like trying to swing a dog by its tail. The crooked handle wobbled around in my hands. The blade either struck in the ground or just tore the heads off the hay. The stubble looked the same way my brother Philip's head did the first time I tried to cut it. We started in the corner of the orchard near the gap in the stone wall. As soon as Grandfather told me what to do, he let the cutter barrel and the mowing machine down and hollered, "Get up! Get up!" to the horses. The yellow colt started off on his hind legs. The gears screeched and the circle pounded back and forth in the cutter bar like a broken piston on a steam engine. I watched them make the first 50 yards before I tried the scythe. The 3 broken knife sections on the machine didn't cut at all, just tore the grass and left it lying in snaky lines on the ground. The yellow colt was still jumping like a rabbit when they went out of sight behind a tree. And every time he jumped, they left a patch of dragged down hay. Above the racket of the machine, Grandfather was shouting, "Tunnel, fool colt, settle down, I tell you." The orchard wasn't more than 10 acres, but it was half an hour before Grandfather got around it the first time. He stopped the mowing machine just beyond the tree I was trying to mow under and hollered, "What in the name of creation be you trying to do?" "I never tried to use one of these things before," I told him. "I haven't got the hang of it yet." "Gory sakes alive," he said as he came toward me. "You might have ate it off evener with your teeth. Why, you ain't got the amount of sense the Almighty give to hens." I was mad enough at myself for not being able to make the scythe do what I wanted it to do. When Grandfather said that, I couldn't help boiling over. "Looks just about as bad as the swath you've cut, doesn't it?" I shouted back. "Only you had a mowing machine to do it for you." Then I hooked the scythe on a limb and started to walk away. Grandfather's voice dropped right down. "Gory sakes alive, Ralphie," he said. "'Tain't no fault of yours, I don't calculate, that you ain't been learning nothing. Here, let your old grandpa show you how to swing a snath and scythe. Pass me the whetstone." You'd have thought Grandfather's wrist and elbow were on ball bearings. There wasn't more than 2 inches of whetstone sticking up out of his fist. He swiped it forward and back along both sides of the scythe edge, so fast my eye couldn't follow his hand. And at every stroke he stoned the blade from heel to point. After about a minute, he ran his thumbnail the length of the blade and said, there, by gory, Ralphie. Now we'll see what kind of logs makes wide shingles." Grandfather slipped the broken stone into his pocket, grasped the hand grips on the snath, had the scythe swinging as he brought it down. Little as he was, he kept in perfect balance as he swung the long blade, and he made it whistle each time it swept forward through the grass. Closely as I watched him, I never saw a jerk or a pull anywhere. The ground was littered with stones, some of them as big as my head. The scythe rode over every one without touching it. When he'd gone 8 or 10 feet, he stopped and held the scythe out toward me. "There you be, Ralphie," he said. "Ain't nothing to it excepting to watch out for rocks. Tunnel had to see some of them where the grass is rank. Now let your old grandpa see you swing it." I did a little better after that, but not very well. For the next half hour, Grandfather alternated between scolding me for being awkward and telling me I was beginning to get the hang of it. Then he went back to the mowing machine. It was out of my sight when I heard Grandfather shouting, and thought he must be in bad trouble. I went running over there as fast as I could, and when I got to where I could see them, he was pulling at the buckskin's bridle and shouting into his face, get up, you tannel fool colt, what ails you? Get up, I tell you." Grandfather dropped the bridle rein when I came running up and said, "Might just as well leave unhitch him. Tannel stubborn critter. Ain't a man this side the Androscoggin River can make him pull once he gets his head set on balking." One of the men I'd worked for in Colorado was an expert with balky horses. I didn't know all the tricks, but I'd learned enough of them that I never had much trouble with his horses. I was sure I wouldn't have any trouble with the yellow colt. "Let me try him," I said to Grandfather, and reached for a piece of thin wire that was twisted around one of the old horse's traces. Stand back, Grandfather snapped at me. For aught I know, he'll commence having one of his cat fits any minute now. As if the yellow colt had understood him, he began shaking his head and sliding around. "Whoa, colty, whoa, whoa," Grandfather shouted, as if the horse had been a mile away. "Unhitch old Nell quick, Ralphie, whilst I loose the colt. Look lively, before he staves the whole shooting match to smithereens. He'd nothing to do now but fetch him back to the barn." That was the end of our haying for the day. As soon as the horses were unharnessed in their stalls, Grandfather sent me to sawing firewood with a bucksaw, and went down to do something around the beehives. I didn't see a thing of Millie all afternoon, but my dirty clothes had been washed and were hanging on the clothesline. It was nearly sunset, and I was as hungry as a coyote when Grandfather called, "Leave be, Ralphie. I and you will go fetch the cows." He came climbing up over the yard wall, looked at the pile of wood I'd sawed, and said, "Gory sake, ain't half bad for a boy that don't know more than you do about farming. Ralphie, calculate your old grandpa can make a man out of you yet. Did Charlie learn you how to handle a bucksaw?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Father taught me to do quite a few things. I've learned a little bit from other men, too." Poor boy. Shame they didn't learn you nothing worthwhile, except to saw wood. Oh well, what's the odds? You're still young enough, and your old grandpa will learn you. Most of the way out through the fields, he kept pointing this or that spot out to me, and telling me long stories about what happened there when his father first took the land up from the wilderness. But I didn't pay any attention to it. I had been told enough that day, mostly about what a fool boy I was, what my old grandpa was going to learn me. I didn't want to hear any more. I told myself that I'd stay there till the hay was in if it killed me, but I'd let him do his learning to somebody else. I'd worked for plenty of ranches, and for market gardeners too. Any one of them would hire me again, and none of them had ever yelled at me or called me a fool boy. The minute the last forkful of hay was in the barn, I'd start for Colorado. All the way up the long hill beside the orchard, I kept thinking about the people I'd go see as soon as I got back to Colorado, and Grandfather kept on talking. Old Bess was walking along beside him, and he might just as well have been doing his talking to her. To me, it was this sound, like brookwater makes in running over stones. At the top of the orchard, he took hold of my arm and pointed toward the field of spindly hay that stretched across the crown of the hill. "Curious," he said, "that high field yonder. Father and my half-brothers cleared it before ever I was born. Take heed the wall here. Not a stone bigger than a sweet pumpkin. Mark them little cobbles amongst the hay. Millions of them, no bigger than a goose egg. I calculate they draw heat from the sun. First field in 20 miles roundabouts to thaw in the spring, the last to freeze up in the fall. Late and early frosts never touch it." I'd heard what he said, but I was still thinking about Colorado, and said, "Too bad it isn't richer ground." Grandfather jerked his hand off my arm and snapped, "Ain't nothing wrong with the soil. Who said there was? Plenty good cow dressing, and that little field will grow 2 tons of good Timothy hay." "I didn't mean I thought there was anything wrong with it," I said. "I don't know very much about dressing." "Don't know much about nothing worthwhile." "Well, I know about strawberries and tomatoes," I said. "What you know about 'em? How to eat 'em?" "Yes," I said, "I know how to eat them. And I worked for men in Colorado who knew how to raise them. He had a high, warm field for them. He always got the highest prices because his strawberries and tomatoes were the first ones to ripen in the Strawberries, Grandfather exploded, time and tarnation. Tomatoes and strawberries. Got 'em, sass, got 'em, sass. Why in thunderation didn't somebody learn you something worthwhile? They did, I snapped back before I could catch myself. Mind your manners, Grandfather shouted. Then he reached out and took hold of my arm again. But he didn't take hold hard. Poor boy, poor Ralphie. Down shame to let a boy grow up so know nothing. Your old grandpa will learn you. No, Ralphie, no, this here's hay soil. Tain't good for nothing else. Gory sakes, we better fetch the cows in before Millie's supper gets cold. Ain't no living with her when her victuals gets cold. We'd been walking along the brow of the hill, where it dipped away eastward toward Lisbon Valley. Crown of the hill was to the westward, and as we passed it, I noticed a few cows and calves standing at a pasture gate beyond. Grandfather slipped one arm inside mine. Ralphie, your old grandpa's powerful glad to have you here. The land's been a-crying for young hands. I done the best I could after Frankie went off to Portland to learn a trade, but I and old Bess was all alone. Levi off a homestead in Dakota, the big barn burning flat to the ground, and malaria keeping me abed half the time. Catched it while I was off to the war. Seems like it bothers me a sight worse since I lost your grandma. Kind of had hopes when Mary wed, me and her and Charlie'd come home to the old place to be with their family. I and your father could have cleared a power of land. I and you will clear a power of it yet, Ralphie. Soon's ever I learn you to be a farmer. Father was older than I be before ever I was born. But he learned me all there is to know about the land. Poor boy, poor Ralphie. The old grandpa will yet learn you to be a worthwhile man. When he first started talking, I'd wanted to squeeze his arm against me a little. But before he was through, I'd taken mine off his, moved far enough away he couldn't put it back. We were nearly to the pasture gate. The 4 cows were waiting there. It was easy to see they were all milch cows, and not very good ones. 3 of them had pretty good-sized calves running with them. And the 4th had a head over the bars, bellowing. So I wasn't as peeved at Grandfather as I felt. I said, you just take the Holstein in for milking? No, take 'em all in, Grandfather said grumpily. Then, as I let the bars down, he and old Bess stood beside the gate post. As each cow passed him, he put a hand on her or petted her and called her by name. And there's a picture of them letting the cows out through the gate. There's his grandfather, and there's Ralphie, and there are the cows. Even Clarabelle, the Holstein without a calf, stopped long enough for him to scratch a tuft of hair between her horns before she hurried down the lane. Next was Jessie, a thin old Jersey with a fat heifer calf. Spotty, a Durham with a steer calf 3 or 4 months old, and Matthew, just a nice old brown cow with a heifer calf that looked like a Jersey. As we started to follow them down the lane, I said, the nights don't get very cold here at this time of year, do they? Grandfather seemed to have forgotten all about the cows. The thumb of one hand was hooked around the finger of the other behind him. His head was down. He leaned a little forward from his hips as he stumped along. No, he said after a little while. Then, after a few more steps, why? Well, I said, I wondered why you didn't leave the cows with the calves in the pasture at night. There aren't any coyotes or wolves to bother them either. Grandfather stopped and looked up at me as though he didn't believe anybody could ask such a foolish question. Gory sakes alive, boy, he said at last. Don't you know nothing? How'd you raise crops without cow manure? Got to take 'em in to save the dressing. Well, they raise pretty good crops in Colorado if they have enough irrigation water. They don't put cow manure on the fields, I told him. We put horse manure under our first potatoes on the ranch, and they all went to tops. Ha! Tattled fools. Horse manure's for hay. Then he put his head back down. Didn't say another word till we were at the barn. Millie had made a johnny cake to go with the fried pork and boiled potatoes for supper, and we had some of the cake that I hadn't had a chance to try at noon, but the tea was terrible. It tasted as if it had been made by boiling musty alfalfa, and it was...
They can't see you. I was just wondering about that.
Oh, whoops. And it was so strong you couldn't see the spoon handle under the surface. She and Grandfather put milk and sugar in theirs. I tried it, but it was still as bitter as quinine. Though I didn't mean to, I must have made a face when I tasted it, because the only thing Millie said to me all through supper was, "Don't be so devilish finicky about your victuals. There's worse weather's none." Grandfather didn't eat anything but a piece of cake and a cup of tea. He dozed off to sleep at the table a couple of times before I'd finished. He was still asleep, with his head resting on the table, when Millie got up and took a faded old calico wrapper from a nail behind the kitchen door. She put it on over the fresh one she was wearing, tied a cloth over her head, took a milk bucket down from the pantry shelf. I could see she was going out to do the barn chores, and I said, "I'll take care of the chores. I've done a lot of milking." All she said was, "Huh, I pity the poor critters," and went out through the summer kitchen. I couldn't just sit in the house and let a woman do the barn work, so I took my cap and followed her. When I got there, she was standing at the tie-up doorway, pulling a pair of old rubbers on over her shoes. I tried again to get her to let me do the milking, but she said Clarabelle had a sore teat and would kick the daylights out of me. She did let me help slop the hogs and do the rest of the chores, though. When we went back to the house, Grandfather had gone to bed. Millie told me she had put my things in the front room at the head of the stairs. She made me take my work shoes off before I went up. She came to the foot of the stairs while I was climbing them and whispered, "That's Levi's room. If you go get it all messed up, I'll skin you alive." Then, without saying good night, she went back into the kitchen and closed the hallway door. There was just enough light left in the sky that I could see where the bed was, that a corner of the covers was turned back. I didn't bother to look for my suitcase or lamp. I took off everything except my BVDs and crawled in. I must have gone to sleep awfully quick, because the next thing I knew, Millie was calling up the stairway, "Get up! What be you, calculating on sleeping the whole blessed day?" It was just about as light as it had been when I went to bed. And that's the end of chapter 5. Well, okay. See you later, everybody. Low battery. I wonder if it got that.
We'll see. Let's see how far it got.
I don't know how long it's been doing that, but so they could see.